Welcome, dear listener, to another journey through the quiet corridors of history. Tonight, we invite you to settle comfortably, perhaps adjusting your pillow just so, as we travel together across the vast Great Plains of North America, where the wind carries stories as old as the stars themselves. Imagine, if you will, the endless grasslands stretching toward every horizon, painted golden by the setting sun. Here, for countless generations, the Lakota people lived in harmony with the rhythms of the earth and sky. Their wisdom, passed down through the gentle voices of elders around flickering fires, offers us a window into a world where every breath of wind, every blade of grass, every turning season held sacred meaning. If these stories stir your soul, consider joining our community of curious minds. Subscribe to never miss a journey into the past. And as the embers of tonight's tale glow softly, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever stood beneath an open sky that made you feel part of something greater? Share your moments of wonder in the comments below. Until next time, may your dreams be as vast as the plains themselves. Tonight, we'll walk softly through 4 aspects of Lakota spiritual and cultural life. We'll begin by experiencing a single night in a winter camp, where the circle of storytelling kept knowledge alive through the longest, coldest months. Then we'll follow the remarkable journey of White Buffalo Calf Woman, whose gift to the Lakota people became the foundation of their most sacred ceremonies. Our third path leads us to explore the mysteries of Lakota astronomy and the profound spiritual significance they found written in the night sky. Finally, we'll step quietly into the world of the holy men and medicine women, the spiritual leaders who guided their people through both earthly and divine realms. As we embark on this gentle exploration, let your breathing slow and deepen. The stories we'll share tonight have been told for centuries to help people find peace, understanding, and connection with the great mystery of existence. Allow these ancient voices to carry you forward, just as they carried generations of Lakota people through the endless cycles of seasons and more seasons on the Great Plains. The wind outside the tipi howls like a living thing, carrying with it the bite of winter that turns breath to clouds and makes the buffalo hide walls tremble slightly with each gust. But inside this sacred space, warmth emanates not just from the carefully tended fire at the center, but from the presence of 23 souls gathered in the ancient circle of learning. You find yourself seated on a soft buffalo robe, your back against a willow rest that has been painted with symbols of the 4 directions. The fire crackles gently before you, its flames dancing in a rhythm that seems to match the quiet beating of your heart. The smoke rises straight up through the smoke hole above, carrying with it the prayers and intentions of all gathered here on this December night, when the snow lies deep and the world outside sleeps beneath winter's heavy blanket. This is how knowledge lived among the Lakota people, not in books or written words, but in the sacred act of gathering, of listening, of allowing the wisdom of countless generations to flow from elder lips to younger ears. You are experiencing what anthropologists would later call the oral tradition, but what the Lakota knew simply as the way things had always been, the way things must always be. The elder speaking tonight is a woman of perhaps 70 winters, her voice carrying the particular cadence that comes from decades of storytelling. Her name translates to walks with thunder, and when she speaks, even the wind outside seems too quiet, as if the very elements pause to listen. Her weathered hands move gracefully as she shapes the air, painting invisible pictures that somehow become more real than the physical world around you. Mitikuo Yasin. She begins, the sacred phrase that means all my relations, acknowledging not just the humans present, but the spirits of ancestors, the 4-legged creatures, the winged ones, the plant people, and all the invisible forces that bind the universe together in one great, breathing whole. This is how every important speaking began among the Lakota, with recognition that nothing exists in isolation, that every story connects to every other story, just as every life connects to every other life. The tipi itself tells a story in its very construction. Its circular shape mirrors the sacred hoop of existence, while the poles reaching upward toward the smoke hole represent the path between earth and sky. Between the material world and the realm of spirits, 28 buffalo hides have been sewn together to create these walls. 28 like the days in a lunar month, like the ribs of the buffalo, like the poles of the tipi frame itself. Nothing in Lakota culture exists without layers of meaning, without connection to the great web of sacred relationships. As Walks with Thunder settles into her storytelling rhythm, you become aware of the subtle sounds that create the backdrop of this winter night. The fire pops occasionally, sending tiny sparks upward like miniature stars returning to their celestial home. Someone's stomach gurgles softly, a reminder of the simple human needs that persist even during the most sacred moments. A baby sleeps peacefully in her cradleboard, her breathing barely audible but steady as the tick of a clock. Outside, you can hear the distant call of a coyote, that trickster voice that often appears in Lakota stories as both troublemaker and teacher. The scent of sage hangs in the air, mixed with the earthy smell of buffalo hide and the sharp, clean odor of winter cold that clings to everyone's clothing. Earlier, before the storytelling began, sweetgrass had been burned to purify the space and call in the helping spirits. Now, hours into the night, these sacred smells have settled into something comforting and familiar, like the spiritual equivalent of bread baking in a warm kitchen. This is the season for storytelling among the Lakota winter, when the work of survival slows just enough to allow for the work of cultural preservation. Spring, summer, and autumn were times of intense activity, following the buffalo herds, gathering plants, preparing for the harsh months ahead. But winter, when the people gathered in their protected camps along river bottoms, where cottonwood trees provided both shelter and food for the horses, winter was when the real education happened. You notice how the children present, and there are several ranging from toddlers to teenagers. Listen with an attention that seems impossible in our modern world of constant distraction. This is partly because they have been raised in a culture where listening is considered a sacred act, where the ability to hold stories in memory is understood as one of the most important skills a person can develop. But it's also because they know that these winter nights are precious and limited. Come spring, the band will scatter across the plains following game and seasonal foods. The intimate circle of shared learning will not form again until the next winter arrives. The elder's voice rises and falls like a gentle tide, carrying with it stories that serve multiple purposes simultaneously. Tonight's tale is about the creation of the world, but embedded within it are lessons about proper behavior, practical knowledge about plant medicine, astronomical observations about the movement of stars, and spiritual teachings about the nature of existence itself. A single story might take 3 hours to tell properly, with pauses for questions, for clarification, for the sharing of related knowledge by other elders present. As the night deepens, you find yourself sinking more fully into the rhythm of this ancient way of learning. There are no notebooks, no recordings, no external memory aids of any kind. Everything depends on the capacity of human consciousness to absorb, retain, and eventually pass on the accumulated wisdom of the people. You begin to understand why Lakota children were trained from infancy to sit still for long periods to listen with their whole beings, to treat each story as a sacred gift that might one day save their lives or the lives of their children. The fire burns lower now, requiring one of the younger men to add another carefully selected piece of wood. The choice of fuel is never random. Different woods burn with different spiritual qualities, and the keeper of the fire must understand these subtle differences. Tonight, they're burning ash wood primarily, which creates a steady, long-lasting flame perfect for the extended storytelling session. The addition of each new piece of wood becomes a small ritual in itself, an offering to the sacred fire that illuminates both the physical space and the spiritual landscape of the stories. Around you, the listeners respond to the elders' words in ways that might seem strange to modern ears. There are soft murmurs of acknowledgement, gentle exclamations of recognition, and periods of complete, reverent silence. Sometimes, when the elder pauses, another voice might add a related detail or ask for clarification about a particular aspect of the story. This is not interruption but collaboration, the understanding that knowledge belongs not to any individual but to the community as a whole. The story Walks with Thunder tells tonight concerns the first humans and their relationship with the buffalo. But as she speaks, she weaves in astronomical details about the constellation known to her people as the Hand, which others call the Big Dipper. She explains how the movement of these stars across the night sky serves as a calendar for ceremony and seasonal activities. She describes the medicinal properties of sage and sweetgrass. She offers teachings about the proper way to pray, the correct protocols for entering sacred space, the responsibilities that come with receiving spiritual knowledge. By the time the story reaches its natural conclusion, nearly 4 hours have passed. Though the experience feels both eternal and instantaneous, the fire has burned down to glowing coals, and several of the youngest children have fallen asleep in their mother's arms. But you and most of the other listeners remain fully present, minds humming with new understanding, hearts expanded by the profound interconnectedness revealed through the elders' words. This is how it was, night after night, winter after winter, for countless generations. Knowledge flowing like water from the old to the young, stories serving as vessels for everything a person needed to know to live in right relationship with the world. No single night's teaching stood alone. Each was part of an intricate tapestry that, when complete, provided a comprehensive guide to being fully human in a world alive with spiritual meaning. As the session draws to a close and people begin to prepare for sleep, you are struck by the profound difference between this way of learning and the fragmented, hurried absorption of information that characterizes our modern world. Here, in this tipi lit by firelight, knowledge is not just data to be consumed, but wisdom to be embodied. Not just facts to be memorized, but relationships to be honored. The wind outside has quieted somewhat, as if even the elements understand that something sacred has transpired here tonight. As you settle into your own sleeping robes, your mind continues to turn over the images and insights shared by Walks with Thunder. You understand now why the Lakota people could maintain such a complex and sophisticated culture without written language, because they had something perhaps even more powerful. The ancient technology of human memory, guided by the sacred responsibility to keep the stories alive. As the embers of countless storytelling fires have faded into memory across the generations, one narrative has remained as constant as the North Star in guiding the spiritual life of the Lakota people. It is the story of White Buffalo Calf Woman, T. Scar Win, whose arrival marked not just a moment in time, but the establishment of the most sacred relationships that would sustain the Lakota through centuries of joy and struggle, abundance and hardship. The story begins, as so many Lakota narratives do, during a time of great need. Picture, if you will, the rolling hills of what would later be called South Dakota, sometime in the distant past that feels both ancient and eternal. The buffalo herds, upon which all life depended, had mysteriously vanished from their traditional grazing grounds. The people were growing hungry, and with hunger came the deeper spiritual malaise that the Lakota understood as a disconnection from the sacred. Relationships that kept the world in balance. 2 young scouts, whose names have been preserved in some versions as Standing Hollowhorn and Running Buffalo, had been sent out to search for game. They were strong men, skilled hunters who had proven themselves in the dangerous work of providing for their people. For days they had traveled across the prairie, seeing nothing but empty grassland stretching endlessly under the vast sky. Their water was running low, their spirits heavy with the responsibility of returning to camp with news their people desperately needed to hear. It was on the 4th day of their search, as the morning sun climbed toward its zenith, that they saw her approaching from the south. At first, she appeared as merely a figure wavering in the heat mirage that danced above the sun-warmed earth. But as she drew closer, both men realized they were witnessing something far beyond the ordinary realm of human experience. She walked with a grace that seemed to barely touch the ground, her feet making no sound on the dried grass. Her dress was of the purest white buckskin, decorated with intricate quillwork that caught and reflected light in patterns that seemed to shift and change as she moved. Her long black hair flowed loose around her shoulders, stirring gently in breezes that the 2 scouts could not feel. But most remarkable of all was the bundle she carried, wrapped in white buffalo hide and cradled in her arms with the tenderness of a mother holding her newborn child. The 2 scouts responded to this apparition in ways that would forever illustrate the choice that faces every human being when confronted with the sacred. The first scout, his mind clouded by desires of the flesh, looked upon the mysterious woman with lustful thoughts. He approached her with intentions that had nothing to do with the spiritual realm she represented. The second scout, perhaps guided by some deeper wisdom, felt immediately that they were in the presence of something holy and held back with appropriate reverence. What happened next varies slightly in different tellings, but the essential truth remains constant. The woman, who possessed knowledge of both men's hearts and intentions, acknowledged the first scout's approach with compassion rather than anger. She invited him to come closer, and as he reached toward her, a great cloud descended upon them both. When the mist cleared moments later, only bones remained where the lustful scout had stood, not as punishment, but as a natural consequence of attempting to profane what was sacred, like ice melting when exposed to fire. To the remaining scout, who had shown proper respect, she spoke in a voice that carried the gentleness of falling snow and the authority of thunder rolling across the plains. "Return to your people," she said. "Tell them to prepare a great lodge in the center of the camp. Tell them that White Buffalo Calf Woman is coming, and that she brings a gift that will help them reconnect with the sacred powers that sustain all life." The scout, whose name in some versions is given as Standing Hollowhorn, ran all the way back to his village, his heart pounding not just from physical exertion, but from the magnitude of what he had witnessed. The tribal leaders listened to his account with the serious attention they gave to all matters of spiritual significance. Preparations began immediately for the construction of a special lodge, not just any tipi, but one designed according to specific sacred protocols that had been preserved for just such extraordinary occasions. 4 days later, as the sun reached its highest point in a cloudless sky, she appeared again at the edge of the village. This time, the entire tribe had gathered to witness her arrival. Men, women, children, and elders stood in respectful silence as she approached, that same ethereal grace carrying her forward as if she moved through water rather than air. She entered the sacred lodge that had been prepared for her, and there, in the presence of the assembled leaders and holy men, she unwrapped the bundle she had carried. Inside was an object that would become the most sacred possession of the Lakota people. The white buffalo calf pipe, chanapa wak, and carved from red stone and adorned with symbols whose meanings would take generations to fully understand. But the pipe itself was only the beginning of her gift. For the next 4 days, White Buffalo Calf Woman remained with the people, teaching them the proper ways to use this sacred instrument. She showed them how to fill the bowl with chanshasha, the red willow bark tobacco that would carry their prayers upward with the smoke. She taught them the songs that must be sung, the prayers that must be spoken, the ceremonies that must be performed to maintain the sacred relationships between human beings and all the other forms of life that shared the world. The pipe, she explained, represented the universe in microcosm. The wooden stem was the plant nation. The red stone bowl was the mineral nation. The fire that lit the tobacco was the sacred element that transformed matter into spirit. When properly used, the pipe created a connection between earth and sky, between the human realm and the realm of the spirits, between the immediate moment and eternal time. She taught them about the 4 directions and their associated powers, the wisdom of the north, the innocence of the south, the introspection of the West, and the illumination of the East. She showed them how to construct prayer altars, how to conduct naming ceremonies for children, how to perform the rites that would guide young people through the transition from childhood to adulthood. Most importantly, she taught them about the sacred hoop, the understanding that all life moves in cycles, that every ending contains the seeds of a new beginning, that the individual is always part of something larger than themselves. On the final day of her stay, White Buffalo Calf Woman gathered the people for one last teaching. She spoke of the prophecies that would guide them through the generations to come, times of abundance and times of scarcity, times when the sacred ways would be honored and times when they would be challenged or forgotten entirely. She told them that as long as they kept the pipe and followed its teachings, they would remain connected to the source of all life, no matter what hardships might come. "The pipe will be your altar," she said. Her words carried on smoke that rose straight up into the limitless sky. "Through it, your prayers will reach the ears of Wakantanka, the great spirit who moves through all things. Through it, you will remember that you are not separate from the buffalo, from the eagles, from the stones and the streams and the growing things. You are all part of one sacred hoop, and what affects one affects all." As she prepared to leave, White Buffalo Calf Woman made one final promise that would sustain the Lakota people through centuries of change and challenge. She told them that she would return again, in a time of great spiritual need, and that her return would be signaled by the birth of a white buffalo calf. This creature, sacred to many Plains tribes but especially meaningful to the Lakota, would serve as a sign that the time of purification and renewal was at hand. Then, in a transformation that defied all ordinary understanding, she began to walk away from the village. As the people watched in wonder, her form began to change. First she became a red and brown buffalo calf, then a white buffalo calf, then a black buffalo, and finally a white buffalo before disappearing entirely into the shimmering heat of the prairie afternoon. The pipe she left behind became the foundation of Lakota spiritual practice, kept by hereditary keepers and brought out only for the most sacred occasions. It served as a tangible reminder of the connection between the human and divine realms. The ceremonies she taught, the sweat lodge, the vision quest, the sun dance, the peace pipe ritual became the pillars supporting a complex spiritual architecture that could sustain a people through any trial. But perhaps most importantly, the story of White Buffalo Calf Woman established a fundamental understanding about the nature of spiritual knowledge itself. It cannot be taken by force or achieved through personal ambition. It comes as a gift, freely given to those who approach it with proper respect and humility. It requires preparation, the building of the sacred lodge, the gathering of the people, the opening of hearts and minds to receive what is being offered. The historical impact of her teachings extended far beyond matters of personal spirituality. The pipe ceremonies became central to diplomacy between tribes, creating bonds of peace that were considered more binding than any written treaty. The understanding of the sacred hoop influenced Lakota approaches to everything from child-rearing to warfare, from seasonal migration patterns to the distribution of resources within the community. Even today, more than 2 centuries after the Lakota people were forced onto reservations, the pipe ceremonies continue. The sacred pipe given by a White Buffalo Calf Woman remains in the custody of its traditional keepers, brought out for occasions when the people need to reconnect with the source of their spiritual strength. And the prophecy of her return gained renewed significance in 1994 when a white buffalo calf was born on a farm in Wisconsin, an event that drew pilgrims from across Indian country, and was interpreted by many as a sign that the time of spiritual renewal had indeed arrived. The story reminds us that the most profound spiritual truths often come to us in our moments of greatest need, when we have exhausted our own resources and must turn to sources of wisdom beyond our individual understanding. Like the 2 scouts searching for buffalo on the empty prairie, we sometimes find that what we were seeking was really seeking us, waiting for us to develop the proper relationship with mystery and reverence that allows sacred knowledge to be received and preserved. Above the endless grasslands of the Great Plains, far from the light pollution that obscures our modern view of the heavens, the night sky once revealed itself in all its magnificent complexity to the Lakota people. Here in the vast darkness punctuated only by the gentle glow of campfires, an entire civilization looked upward and found not merely distant points of light, but a living library of knowledge, a sacred calendar, and a map for navigating both earthly and spiritual realms. The mystery that draws us into this segment of our journey tonight centers on a remarkable discovery made by archaeologists and ethnographers working with Lakota elders in the late 20th century. They found that the Lakota possessed astronomical knowledge of stunning sophistication, knowledge that enabled them to predict eclipses, track planetary movements, and maintain ceremonial calendars with accuracy that rivaled the calculations of ancient Greek mathematicians. Yet this wisdom was preserved entirely through oral tradition and symbolic representation. To understand the depth of this mystery, imagine yourself lying on a buffalo robe on a clear autumn night in the year 1750, somewhere in what we now call the Black Hills region of South Dakota. The Milky Way stretches overhead like a river of light, so bright and detailed that you can see the dark lanes of cosmic dust threading through its luminous expanse. Your Lakota companions call this celestial river the Trail of Spirits, and they explain that it represents the path souls follow after death to reach the land of the ancestors. But this is only the beginning of the astronomical knowledge that surrounds you on this starlit night. Your elderly guide, a man known as Star Walker, points to various constellations and begins to share teachings that will continue until dawn. What you discover is that the Lakota sky contains an entirely different set of star patterns from those recognized by European astronomy, and that each of these patterns serves multiple purposes, as navigation aids, seasonal calendars, spiritual teachers, and repositories of cultural knowledge. The constellation that Europeans called the Big Dipper was known to the Lakota as the Hand or sometimes the Great Bear, but their understanding of this star pattern went far beyond simple recognition. Star Walker explains that the movement of the hand around the North Star throughout the night and across the seasons provided a precise celestial clock. By observing its position relative to the horizon at different times of year, Lakota astronomers could determine not only the time of night, but also the exact date, enabling them to schedule ceremonies, predict seasonal changes, and coordinate the movements of different bands across the vast territory they called home. More remarkably still, the Lakota recognized what modern astronomers call the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that causes the positions of stars to shift gradually over periods of thousands of years. This knowledge, encoded in stories about the gradual movement of certain star patterns, suggests that Lakota astronomical observations had been maintained with consistent accuracy for far longer than most scholars had previously believed possible for a culture without written records. The mystery deepens when we consider the medicine wheels, ancient stone circles found throughout the northern Great Plains, some dating back over 4,000 years. The most famous of these, the Bighorn Medicine Wheel in Wyoming, consists of stones arranged in a pattern that aligns precisely with the rising and setting positions of certain stars at the summer solstice. But here's what makes this truly mysterious. The alignments were calculated not for the time when the wheel was built, but for specific dates, thousands of years in the future, suggesting that the builders possessed knowledge of celestial mechanics that would not be formally recognized by European science until the Renaissance. Star Walker draws your attention to a group of stars that European astronomers labeled the Pleiades, but which the Lakota knew as the Seven Stars, or the Bunched Stars. According to Lakota tradition, these stars represented 7 brothers who had been transformed into celestial beings as a result of their spiritual dedication. But beyond the mythology, the Lakota used the visibility and position of these stars as an incredibly precise seasonal indicator. When the Pleiades appeared just before dawn in early summer, it signaled the time for the sun dance ceremony. When they reached their highest point at midnight, winter had arrived in full force. The sophistication of this astronomical knowledge becomes even more apparent when you learn about the Lakota understanding of what they call the star that does not walk around the North Star. They recognized that while all other stars appeared to move across the sky throughout the night, this one star remained stationary, serving as the central axis around which the entire celestial sphere rotated. This understanding formed the basis for a complex system of navigation that allowed Lakota hunters and war parties to travel hundreds of miles across seemingly featureless prairie and still find their way home. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Lakota astronomy was their knowledge of what modern science calls variable stars, stars that brighten and dim in regular cycles. The star we know as Algol in the constellation Perseus was carefully observed by Lakota astronomers, who noted its unusual behavior of dimming noticeably every 2.87 days. They incorporated this observation into their ceremonial calendar, using the star's predictable dimming as a timing mechanism for certain rituals that required precise scheduling. The mystery of how this knowledge was preserved and transmitted across generations without written language reveals one of the most sophisticated memory systems ever developed by human culture. A single story might contain star maps, seasonal indicators, navigation instructions, and ceremonial timing all woven together in a narrative that was both entertaining and educational. For example, the story of the Great Race, a popular Lakota legend about a competition between 4- and 2-legged creatures, actually encodes detailed information about the movement of specific constellations throughout the year. The characters in the story represent different star groups, and their adventures correspond to the rising and setting of these constellations at various seasons. By learning the story, children automatically acquired the astronomical knowledge necessary to function as contributing members of their society. Archaeological evidence supports the antiquity and accuracy of this star knowledge. Researchers studying stone cairns and earthworks created by plains, Indian cultures have found alignments that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics dating back thousands of years. Some of these alignments track not just the obvious cycles of sun and moon, but also the much more subtle movements of Venus, which the Lakota called the star that travels around and recognized as being the same celestial object, whether it appeared as the morning star or the evening star. The Lakota also possessed knowledge of meteor showers, which they understood as times when the spirits of the sky world were particularly active. They could predict the annual return of what we now call the Perseid meteor shower, timing certain ceremonies to coincide with these celestial fireworks. Stories about the time when the sun died in the day appear to describe solar eclipses with remarkable accuracy, including details about the behavior of animals and changes in temperature that modern science has confirmed as typical eclipse phenomena. The fact that these descriptions were preserved orally for generations suggests that the Lakota maintained cultural memory systems of extraordinary depth and reliability. The spiritual dimension of Lakota astronomy adds another layer of mystery to their celestial knowledge. Stars were not merely objects to be observed and catalogued, but living beings with personalities, relationships, and influences on earthly affairs. The morning star, Venus, was understood as a warrior who battled the forces of darkness each dawn. The evening star was seen as the same being in a different aspect, now serving as a guide for spirits traveling to the afterlife. This integration of astronomical observation with spiritual understanding created a worldview in which the movements of celestial bodies were intimately connected to earthly events. Certain stars were believed to influence the growth of specific plants, the behavior of animals, and the success of human endeavors. Lakota holy men and women studied these relationships carefully, developing what amounted to a sophisticated system of celestial divination that guided decision-making at both individual and tribal levels. The accuracy of Lakota eclipse predictions provides perhaps the most compelling evidence for the depth of their astronomical knowledge. Historical records kept by European observers document several instances where Lakota people predicted solar eclipses years in advance, sometimes traveling hundreds of miles to observe them from locations where they knew the eclipse would be most dramatic. As dawn approaches and Star Walker's teachings draw to a close, you find yourself with a profound new appreciation for the intellectual achievements of the Lakota people. Their night sky was not a mysterious, chaotic realm of distant lights, but an ordered, predictable system whose patterns they had decoded through centuries of careful observation and ingenious memory techniques. They had solved many of the same astronomical puzzles that challenged the greatest minds of ancient Greece and medieval Islam, but they had done so using methods perfectly adapted to their nomadic lifestyle and oral culture. The mystery that remains is how much of this knowledge has been lost to the disruptions of the past 2 centuries, and how much might still be recovered through collaboration between Lakota elders and modern astronomers. Recent projects bringing together traditional knowledge keepers and professional scientists have revealed that many aspects of this ancient star wisdom remain intact, preserved in the memories of people who still look to the night sky, not just as a source of scientific data, but as a living connection to the sacred cosmos that contains and sustains all life. In the gentle light of early morning, as the last stars fade into the brightening sky, we turn our attention to a group of individuals whose lives stood apart from the daily rhythms of hunting, gathering, and survival that occupied most members of Lakota society. These were the Waikamunga, the holy men, and the Pajutawinyan, the medicine women, whose calling placed them at the intersection between the earthly and spiritual worlds, carrying responsibilities that were both profoundly honored and intensely demanding. Picture, if you will, the tipi of such a spiritual leader, set slightly apart from the main circle of the camp. From the outside, it might appear unremarkable, perhaps even modest compared to the elaborately decorated lodges of successful hunters or prominent warriors. But step inside, and you enter a space that serves as pharmacy, temple, counseling center, and cosmic observatory all at once. The interior is arranged according to principles that reflect deep understanding of sacred geometry and spiritual practice. Along the western wall, where the sun sets and spirits are believed to enter our world, hang dozens of medicine bundles, each one wrapped in soft buckskin and containing objects of power gathered during years of vision quests, healing ceremonies, and spiritual journeys. Eagle feathers arranged in careful patterns represent prayers made manifest. Stones of unusual color or shape, each one discovered during moments of spiritual significance, rest in places of honor. The air itself carries a different quality here, thick with the lingering presence of sage, sweet grass, and cedar smoke, but also somehow lighter, as if the very atmosphere has been purified by years of prayer and ceremony. The earth floor has been packed smooth and covered with specially prepared hides, creating a surface that is both practical for the work of healing and appropriate for the sacred activities that take place here regularly. This is where Crow Feather Woman conducts her practice as one of the most respected medicine women of her band. At 63 winters, she carries in her weathered hands and penetrating gaze the accumulated wisdom of 4 decades spent learning to work with forces that most people can sense, but few can effectively channel. Her day begins before dawn, not with the mundane tasks of preparing food or tending to household needs, but with the complex ritual obligations that maintain her relationship with the helping spirits who assist in her healing work. The first hour after waking is devoted to what she simply calls listening, a practice that involves sitting in complete stillness while allowing her consciousness to expand and receive whatever information the spirit world might be offering about the day ahead. This is not meditation in the sense that modern people might understand it, but something more active and purposeful. A deliberate opening of spiritual senses that have been trained, through years of practice, to perceive subtleties that remain invisible to ordinary awareness. On this particular morning, her listening reveals that someone in the camp will need healing for a respiratory ailment before the day is over. The knowledge comes not as a voice or vision, but as a subtle shift in the quality of the air around her, combined with a gentle tingling sensation in her hands that she has learned to interpret as guidance about which medicines will be needed. Without knowing yet who will require her help, she begins gathering the appropriate plants and preparing the remedies that her spiritual guidance indicates will be necessary. This is the reality of life as a medicine person among the Lakota, existing in a state of constant readiness to serve the spiritual and physical needs of the community, guided by forms of knowledge that cannot be learned from books or acquired through ordinary study. Crowfeather Woman's abilities were not inherited, though spiritual calling sometimes runs in families. Instead, they emerged through a combination of natural sensitivity, intensive training, and experiences that marked her as someone chosen by the spirits to serve as a bridge between worlds. Her initiation into this role began when she was 14 years old, during a vision quest that lasted for days and nights on an isolated hilltop overlooking the Powder River. During the final night of her vigil, weakened by fasting and exposure to the elements, she experienced what the Lakota call a spirit dream, a visionary encounter, so vivid and meaningful that it would shape the entire direction of her life. In this vision, she was approached by a figure that appeared as an elderly woman dressed in the traditional regalia of a medicine person, but whose face seemed to shift and change, sometimes appearing as human, sometimes as various animals, sometimes as pure light. This spirit teacher, who identified herself as one of Crowfeather Woman's ancestors from 7 generations past, began a teaching that would continue throughout her life. The initial instruction lasted what felt like hours within the dream, though the sun had moved only slightly across the sky when she awakened. She learned the locations of healing plants, the proper prayers for approaching them, the methods for preparing medicines that would address not just physical symptoms but the spiritual imbalances that the Lakota understood as the root causes of illness. More importantly, she received what medicine people call the gift of seeing, the ability to perceive the spiritual aspects of illness, to recognize when physical symptoms reflected deeper problems in a person's relationship with the sacred forces that sustain life. This gift came with a warning that would prove prophetic. The path of the medicine person is one of service and sacrifice, requiring the practitioner to put the needs of the community before personal desires, and to maintain spiritual discipline even when it conflicts with ordinary human inclinations. The years following her vision were devoted to intensive apprenticeship under the guidance of 2 established medicine women. This training involved learning not just the practical skills of herbalism and healing, but the complex protocols that govern interaction with the spirit world. She learned that certain plants could only be gathered at specific times of day or phases of the moon, that some healing ceremonies required fasting for days beforehand, that the effectiveness of any medicine depended as much on the spiritual state of the healer as on the pharmacological properties of the remedy. Her apprenticeship also involved learning to work with what the Lakota call spirit helpers, non-physical beings who assist medicine people in their healing work. These helpers might appear as animals, as ancestors, as forces of nature, or as beings that have no earthly equivalent. Developing relationships with these helpers required years of ceremony, offering, and gradual building of trust. Each helper brought different gifts. One might provide guidance about the use of specific plants. Another might offer protection during dangerous spiritual work. A third might serve as a messenger between the physical and spiritual worlds. The daily routine of a medicine person like Crowfeather Woman differs dramatically from that of other tribal members. While hunters might spend days away from camp following game, and while gatherers might range far across the landscape collecting seasonal foods, the medicine person remains close to the community, available for the emergencies and ongoing health needs that arise constantly in any group of people living close to the natural world. Her morning preparations complete, Crowfeather Woman spends the early hours of daylight in activities that might appear mundane to casual observers but carry profound spiritual significance. She tends a small garden of medicinal plants that grow near her tipi, not just common healing herbs like echinacea and willowbark, but also plants considered so sacred that their names are spoken only during ceremonies. Each plant is approached with prayer and offering, treated not as a commodity to be harvested, but as a living being with its own spirit and intelligence. The gathering of wild medicines requires even more elaborate protocols. When her spiritual guidance indicates the need for a particular plant that grows in distant locations, she must first fast and purify herself, then approach the plant's habitat with appropriate ceremony. The actual gathering involves prayers, offerings of tobacco or other sacred substances, and the careful selection of only those plants that seem to offer themselves willingly for healing purposes. She takes only what is needed, leaving the root systems intact and ensuring that the plant community remains healthy for future generations. By midday, word has reached her that a young mother in the camp is indeed struggling with the respiratory ailment that her morning listening had revealed. The woman's breathing has become labored, and her infant child is showing signs of the same condition. This is the moment when all of Crow Feather Woman's training converges into practical action. The healing session that follows illustrates the sophisticated integration of physical and spiritual approaches that characterizes Lakota medicine. She begins by examining the patient not just for physical symptoms, but for signs of spiritual imbalance, using diagnostic techniques that combine observation of the patient's energy field with information received from her spirit helpers. She determines that the illness stems from a violation of certain taboos related to the handling of sacred objects during the woman's recent moon time. The treatment involves multiple phases, each addressing different aspects of the condition. First, she prepares a tea from the respiratory herbs she had gathered that morning, but the brewing process involves prayers and ceremonies that activate what she understands as the spiritual properties of the plants. While the patient drinks this medicine, Crow Feather Woman conducts a purification ceremony using sage smoke and eagle feathers, working to restore the spiritual balance that has been disrupted. The most challenging aspect of the healing involves what medicine people call extraction, the removal of spiritual intrusions that manifest as physical illness. Using techniques that combine prayer, visualization, energy work, and physical manipulation, she works to draw out the negative influences that have taken hold in the patient's body. This process requires enormous concentration and spiritual strength, as the medicine person must be careful not to absorb the harmful energies she is removing. The healing session lasts nearly 4 hours, during which time Crow Feather Woman barely moves from her position beside the patient. Her assistant, a younger woman who is learning the medicine ways, helps by maintaining the sacred fire, preparing additional remedies as needed, and ensuring that the ceremonial protocols are followed precisely. By evening, the patient's breathing has improved dramatically and her child's symptoms have disappeared entirely. This successful healing brings both satisfaction and exhaustion. The spiritual energy required for such work depletes even experienced practitioners, requiring careful attention to personal restoration and balance. Bathing in smoke from sacred plants, and consuming foods that are understood to strengthen the connection between physical and spiritual bodies. But her day is not yet finished. As darkness falls, she receives another type of visitor, a young man who has been experiencing dreams that he believes carry spiritual significance. As a recognized interpreter of visions and dreams, she is often consulted by tribal members who need help understanding messages they may be receiving from the spirit world. This consultation requires a different set of skills than physical healing, involving the ability to interpret symbolic language, recognize spiritual patterns, and provide guidance that helps individuals understand their place within the larger web of sacred relationships. The young man's dreams, as she interprets them, indicate that he is being called to undertake a vision quest that will reveal his adult name and spiritual direction. Her role is to help him understand the proper timing and protocols for this important rite of passage, to recommend the appropriate location for his vigil, and to provide the spiritual preparation that will help ensure a successful vision experience. Dreams, visions, and other forms of spiritual communication are taken seriously within Lakota culture, but they require interpretation by individuals with the training and spiritual authority to distinguish between meaningful spiritual guidance and ordinary psychological phenomena. As the night deepens and her final visitor departs, Crow Feather Woman begins the process of spiritual closure that marks the end of each day's work. This involves reviewing the day's healings and consultations with her spirit helpers, offering prayers of gratitude for successful treatments, and seeking guidance about any ongoing concerns that may require attention in the days ahead. Her life, while honored and respected within the community, comes with sacrifices that are invisible to most observers. Medicine people often live apart from ordinary social relationships, as their spiritual responsibilities can interfere with family life and personal desires. They are expected to be available for emergencies at any hour, to maintain spiritual discipline even when they are tired or discouraged, and to put the needs of the community before their own comfort or convenience. The economic aspect of being a medicine person also differs from other roles within Lakota society. While successful hunters might accumulate wealth through their prowess, and while skilled craftspeople might build prosperity through their talents, medicine people traditionally work for gifts rather than set payments. Patients and their families offer what they can, sometimes horses or buffalo robes, sometimes food or other practical items, sometimes simply prayers and gratitude. This system ensures that healing is available to everyone regardless of their economic status, but it also means that medicine people must rely on the generosity of the community for their material needs. The spiritual isolation that comes with this calling can be particularly challenging. Medicine people often possess knowledge and experiences that cannot be shared with ordinary tribal members, creating a sense of separation even within the close-knit bonds of tribal society. They may see and understand things that others cannot perceive, carry responsibilities that others cannot fully appreciate, and face spiritual challenges that have no parallel in ordinary life. Yet for those truly called to this path, like Crow Feather Woman, these challenges are balanced by the profound satisfaction that comes from serving as a conduit for healing and spiritual guidance. Each successful treatment, each vision properly interpreted, each spiritual crisis successfully navigated, contributes to the overall health and harmony of the community. The medicine person becomes a living bridge between the earthly concerns of daily survival and the transcendent realms where ultimate meaning and purpose reside. As our gentle exploration of Lakota spiritual leadership draws to a close, we're left with deep appreciation for the complexity and sophistication of indigenous healing traditions. These men and women carried within their consciousness entire libraries of medical, psychological, and spiritual knowledge, serving their communities with dedication that modern healthcare providers might well admire and emulate. Their legacy reminds us that healing involves far more than treating symptoms. It requires understanding the intricate relationships between physical health, emotional balance, social harmony, and spiritual connection that characterize truly comprehensive approaches to human well-being. As the first light of dawn touches the horizon of our imagined journey across the Great Plains, we find ourselves returning to where we began, around the gentle warmth of a dying fire, surrounded by the timeless wisdom that flows like a quiet river through the oral traditions of the Lakota people. The stories we have shared tonight form their own sacred circle, each one connecting to the others in ways that mirror the great web of relationships that the Lakota understood as the fundamental structure of existence itself. We began our evening in the intimate circle of winter storytelling, where knowledge lived not in books or written words, but in the sacred act of human voices carrying wisdom across the generations. There in the flickering light of buffalo dung fires we witnessed how an entire civilization preserved its most essential teachings through the ancient technology of memory, guided by the understanding that some truths can only be transmitted from heart to heart, from one living consciousness to another. From that foundation, we followed the transformative journey of White Buffalo Calf Woman, whose gift of the sacred pipe established the spiritual practices that would sustain the Lakota people through centuries of change and challenge. Her story reminds us that the most profound teachings often arrive during our moments of greatest need, offered freely to those who approach the sacred with proper reverence and humility. The pipe she brought became more than a ceremonial object. It became a living symbol of the connections that bind all life together in one breathing sacred whole. Our third path led us into the vast library of the night sky, where Lakota astronomers read stories written in starlight and preserved knowledge of celestial mechanics through generations of careful observation. We discovered that indigenous science was no less sophisticated than its European counterparts, only organized according to different principles, embedded in narrative rather than written in equations, transmitted through ceremony rather than recorded in textbooks, but no less accurate or profound in its understanding of the cosmos. Finally, we entered the sacred world of the medicine people, those individuals whose calling placed them at the intersection between earthly and spiritual realms. Through the daily life of a medicine woman, we glimpsed the dedication and sacrifice required to serve as healers and spiritual guides, maintaining the delicate balance between individual needs and community welfare, between practical healing and sacred mystery. Each of these segments reveals different facets of a culture that understood life as fundamentally interconnected, where spiritual and material realities were not separate domains but different aspects of a single, unified existence. The Lakota worldview recognized no sharp divisions between science and spirituality, between individual and community, between human needs and the welfare of all other forms of life that shared their prairie homeland. This integration of knowledge and wisdom offers something precious to our modern world, where specialization has created brilliant insights, but also profound fragmentation. The Lakota elders knew that a story about the creation of the world was simultaneously a teaching about astronomy, a guide to proper living, a map of sacred relationships, and a method for remembering practical information needed for survival. Their approach to learning honored both the rational mind and the intuitive heart, both the needs of the present moment and the welfare of generations yet to come. As you settle more deeply into the comfort of your own bed in your own time, surrounded by the conveniences and securities that our ancestors could hardly have imagined, perhaps you can carry with you some appreciation for the wisdom that guided human beings through thousands of years of life lived close to the natural world. The challenges faced by the Lakota people were immediate and often harsh: finding food and shelter, protecting their families from both human enemies and natural dangers, maintaining social harmony. Within small groups it depended entirely on each other for survival. Yet from these challenges arose teachings of remarkable sophistication and beauty. The understanding that we are all related, Mitaku Oyasin, emerged not from abstract philosophical speculation, but from direct experience of interdependence, from living every day with the knowledge that individual survival depended absolutely on the health of the community and the land that sustained them both. The recognition of the sacred in all aspects of existence came not from theological doctrine but from intimate daily contact with forces of nature that were obviously powerful, mysterious, and deserving of respect. Their stories remind us that human beings have always looked for meaning beyond the immediate requirements of survival. have always sensed that life contains purposes deeper than the satisfaction of material needs. The sacred pipe ceremonies, the vision quests, the careful attention to dreams and signs. All of these practices reflect an understanding that consciousness itself is sacred, that the capacity for awareness and choice that defines human existence carries with it both tremendous privilege and profound responsibility. The prophecy of White Buffalo Calf Woman, that she would return in times of great spiritual need, speaks to this ongoing human search for meaning and connection. Whether or not we interpret her promise literally, it points toward something universally true about human nature, that we are always seeking teachers, always hoping for guidance, always ready to recognize wisdom when it appears in forms we can understand and accept. The astronomical knowledge preserved by Lakota observers reminds us that our ancestors were not primitive or ignorant, but rather possessed different forms of intelligence adapted to different ways of life. Their ability to maintain accurate star catalogs through oral tradition, to predict eclipses without written mathematics, to navigate vast distances using only celestial landmarks. These achievements represent cognitive capabilities that we have perhaps lost as much as gained through our technological advances. The medicine people, with their integration of physical and spiritual healing approaches, offer insights that contemporary healthcare is only beginning to rediscover. Their understanding that illness often reflects imbalances in relationships between individuals and their communities, between human beings and the natural world, between material and spiritual dimensions of existence, anticipates developments in modern medicine that recognize the profound connections between psychological, social, and physical aspects of health. But perhaps most importantly, these stories offer us something that our busy, fragmented lives often lack: a sense of belonging to something larger and more enduring than our individual existence. The sacred hoop that encompassed all of life in Lakota understanding provides a model for thinking about our own place in the web of relationships that sustain contemporary life. We too are connected to the plants and animals, the water and air, the minerals and elements that make earthly existence possible. We too are part of family lines that stretch back through countless generations and forward through children yet to be born. The winter storytelling circles that preserved Lakota wisdom offer a template for our own need to gather, to share, to listen deeply to voices that carry knowledge we cannot acquire in isolation. The elders who spoke around those buffalo dung fires understood something that we are perhaps learning again, that the most important teachings cannot be downloaded or Googled, but must be received in relationship through the irreplaceable medium of human presence and attention. As the fire that has warmed our imaginary journey burns down to glowing coals, as the stars that guided Lakota astronomers continue their ancient dance across the darkening sky, as the spirits of those who told these stories for countless generations settle into the quiet peace that comes at the end of all telling, we are left with gratitude. Gratitude for the voices that preserved these teachings through centuries of change and challenge. Gratitude for the opportunity to listen, even briefly, to wisdom that emerged from ways of life we can barely imagine. Gratitude for the reminder that human existence has always been about more than mere survival, has always included the search for beauty, meaning, and connection with the sacred mystery that moves through all things. The Lakota people understood that every ending contains the seeds of a new beginning, that the circle of existence turns continuously, that what appears to be conclusion is really transformation. As this particular telling comes to its natural close, the stories themselves continue their eternal journey, carried now in your consciousness as they were once carried in the memories of children, listening around winter fires on the Great Plains. May you rest well, dear listener, held by the same vast sky that sheltered countless generations of storytellers and story listeners. May your dreams be filled with the gentle wisdom of those who understood that we are all related, all part of the same sacred hoop, all traveling together through the great mystery of existence. And may you wake tomorrow with renewed appreciation for the enduring human capacity to find meaning, beauty, and connection even in the midst of life's greatest challenges. The circle is complete, but like all true circles, it has no end. The stories continue, the wisdom flows onward, and somewhere on the endless plains of memory and imagination, the fires are always burning, the elders are always speaking, and there is always room in the circle for one more listener seeking the ancient comfort of shared human wisdom.